Hi, my name is Avery Stoltz. This is my hip pocket history video for Western Civ. I'm going to be discussing some of the historical sites in the abolition movement in Ohio and the anti-slavery efforts. And so I'm here at the First Congregational Church in Mount Vernon, Ohio. This is where I'm at. And so this church right here, First Congregational Church, is a historical site. It's a historical site for the Underground Railroad and the anti-slavery efforts in, not only Mount Vernon, but all of Ohio. And so before I get into why this church in this area here is historical, I'm first just going to talk about, why Ohio is historical and the history behind slavery in Ohio. And so the Northwest Ordinance, so Ohio was established under the Northwest Ordinance, and so the Northwest Ordinance was passed in 1787, and so part of the Northwest Ordinance forbade slavery. And so when Ohio was founded in 1803, it was a free state, so slavery was not legal. But although slavery itself was not legal, prejudice and black codes were still in full effect, and so many people in the Ohio area and also all the Northwest Territory were still very much prejudiced against black citizens, even if they were free. And the black codes prevented, it kind of made it harder for black citizens to live in the state of Ohio. And so under these black codes, black citizens had to buy a court certificate proving their freedom and a $500 bond, even allowing them to reside in Ohio. And so even though black codes weren't particularly welcoming to the black citizens that were living in Ohio, Ohio was still a vital part of the Underground Railroad and kind of the abolition movement, because it was still a free state as compared to its neighboring states of Kentucky and Virginia, which Virginia at the time was not West Virginia. It was before West Virginia had, seceded from Virginia as part of the Union. And so, all bordering sides of Ohio, besides Indiana, slavery was legal. And so, Ohio was obviously a safer area than the slave states. And so this made Ohio a place of refuge, because it was close. It was close by. Slaves could easily escape over the Ohio River. And so crossing the Ohio River was kind of like crossing into freedom, basically, crossing into a free state on your way up to north. The ultimate goal was to end up north in Canada, where they could have freedom. So, but crossing the Ohio River did mean freedom, but slave catchers knew this. And so slave catching was very prominent around the whole Ohio border and Ohio River area. And so you look at places like Cincinnati and all other areas along the border were very, very active in kind of like both slave catching, slave trade as well. Some of the few instances of slavery in Ohio were there along the Ohio River. So slave catchers knew this. So that was kind of a hot spot for slave catchers to try and find escaped slaves, but it was also a hot spot for participation in the Underground Railroad, because many people who were kind and empathetic towards escaped slaves would take them in, bring them in, house them, and give them safety from the slave catchers as they traveled up north. And so places like that along the river were much more historical. They were kind of much more key. They were kind of key cities, key factors of abolition, of the whole movement, and creating safety for slaves. But regardless, the smaller cities up north, such as Mount Vernon, still played a vital role in the whole, efforts and movement, because it was, a lot further away from the river. It was a lot further away from slave catchers. And so people in towns like these were pretty active on the Underground Railroad. And so that brings me to Mount Vernon itself and this church itself. So this church in Mount Vernon was established in 1834 as an anti-slavery church. And so this right here is actually a bench in front of the church. And so it says, in 1834, we began as an anti-slavery church, working with others to oppose slavery and help courageous black Americans escape slavery on the Underground Railroad. As it ran through Mount Vernon, we continue to seek justice and love kindness. We pray others will too. And so this church was huge historical site, kind of for all of civil rights, really, especially in the area. And so this church would help and give refuge to escaped slaves, feed them, house them, send them on their way back up north. This church, as well as St. Paul's Episcopal Church, just a few blocks away downtown Mount Vernon, was also part of the Underground Railroad. This did not come without, kind of a lot of people running against it as well. A lot of people, as I mentioned earlier, were still prejudiced. And so people around the area would sometimes protest and, riot in front of this church, and even sometimes interrupt the church services and just kind of crash the church services and run in and start yelling in protest. And so it was not unopposed. This movement was not unopposed by people in the area, but there were many, many brave and courageous souls that did, kind of dedicate their lives to helping people who were, not living in freedom. So for that reason, this church and the town is a great historical site. Maybe not as historical or as keystone in the whole movement as places like Cincinnati or places along the Ohio River, but still very, very much crucial to the history of this town. So, and the town of all of Mount Vernon. So, yep, that's my history lesson for today, and so thanks so much.